Calatheas and prayer plants have got one of the worst reputations in the houseplant world. Depending on who you ask, some people might say they are stunning tropical masterpieces, whilst others will just say they're very expensive compost. Over the past few years, I've owned more than 20 such plants. Some of them were absolutely stunning, some of them nearly broke me. And today I'm ranking them all from worst to best. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplanttygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. Right, before anybody gets upset, this ranking is based on two factors. So you'll get a score for each one of these. One is how easy it was for me personally to grow this plant, and two, how attractive I, again, personally class this plant to be. Which means that absolutely some plants on this list are about to lose some points because they were essentially little botanical terrorists. And some of the less pretty plants will probably rise up the ranks because guess what? They wanted to live. What I'll do throughout all of this list is actually give you two scores, an attractiveness score out of 10 for myself and also an ease of growth score as well. So 10 for all of these will be best or easiest, and then 1 or 0 will be worst or hardest to take care of. And before anybody asks, I will try for most of these plants to put somewhere on the screen as well my conditions when I owned this plant and for how long I owned this plant, just to give you a bit of an understanding, because obviously I've lived and grown these plants in different conditions, different environments, different houses, and that all matters. And the first and second plant on these lists are closely related. I'll start with the first one, the Calathea Yellow Fusion, not the White Fusion. The Calathea Yellow Fusion. And to this, I've given a difficulty score of 10 out of 10 because the fusions generally can be quite dramatic plants. Again, I won't say this throughout the entirety of the video, but I know some people have grown these successfully or have had them bounce back. This one for me grew like absolute rubbish. It wasn't happy in here with the humidity as high as it is, the temperatures as high as they are, with the right amount of soil, it just didn't really survive. The attractiveness score out of 10 for this one for me is going to be at 4. Purely because, to me, this was a consolation prize because I couldn't find the plant that I wanted, which was the White Fusion. I wasn't that enamored with the yellow kind of variegated version of this plant. And did my opinion of that change as I grew this? Absolutely not. So for that reason, this is last on my list. First, as I'm going through this, but we're starting with worst and getting towards the best. So yes, Calathea Yellow Fusion, hard pass for me. Quickly after that, next one on the list, and this is looking like rubbish already. It was looking better like about a month ago. This is the Calathea White Fusion. I will put a better picture here of what this plant can look like. Much like the other one, however, a difficulty score for this one for me was a 10 out of 10. However, attractiveness score for me for this plant was a 7 out of 10. Had you have asked me when I first bought this or for when I was first looking for this plant, it probably would have been a 10 out of 10 for attractiveness. I do think this is one of the most beautiful Calatheas out there. Personal opinion, again, I tend to also enjoy variegated plants. I know a lot of people do not, and these plants do give a bit more like a variegated type of Calathea. But yes, it is a difficult plant. Same situation here. I will say I grew this easier than I did the Yellow Fusion, and maybe some of you might say it's unfair to give them both a 10 out of 10 in terms of difficulty, but just because I grew this any easier than the other one doesn't mean that this doesn't deserve the 10 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. So buyer beware with the White Fusion, beautiful plant, but again, not just from my experience, from what I'm hearing from a lot of other people, and it's interesting because this is the one plant that people will come in random comments and just go, my White Fusion is doing well now, and I'm just like, okay, but this was an allocation video. But good to know. But it is one that people feel a lot of pride when they finally get it to a stage where it's doing okay, and the cyclical nature for this one for me is it will look like rubbish for a large chunk of the year, and for about a month or two it will look really, really good, and then we'll go back to rubbish. So that is the reason why it is where it is on this list. The next one might surprise a few people, and it is one that I've enjoyed growing quite a lot. The Calathea Orbifolia. Now, scoring wise for this one, a difficulty score of 9 out of 10. And some of you might be surprised by this. The reason why I'm giving this a 9 out of 10, out of a lot of the Calatheas that I have grown, does it have much more difficult needs, much like the White Fusion? No. But this is the one thing that, my experience, and from what I've heard from a lot of other people, you can get this to quite a large, sizable size. Again, not everybody, but the people that can, the moment that you change its position or change its environment ever so slightly is the moment that this turns into mush or like dried up dust, basically. So that's why this gets a 9 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. However, conversely with this one, for me, this is a 10 out of 10 in terms of attractiveness. I do truly think this is a beautiful, beautiful plant. To this day, would this be a Calathea that I would like to retry again? Yes, 100%, and that should tell you something. But the size that those leaves get, the striping that you get on these leaves, and we'll come to striping in another Calathea soon as well, absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. Is it worth some of the heartache? Possibly, at least in my experience, but do not lie to yourself and think that this is ultimately going to be a long-term easy Calathea, because it won't be the moment that you decide, oh, you're getting too big, I need to move you. Oh no, you're nothing. After like months or even years of trying to get you to this ginormous size. So the one thing I would say that I've learned from this plant is if you like it and you can get it to a large enough stage, make sure that the location that you're giving it will be enough so you never have to move it from there. And a plant now that I did recently mention in another video, the Calathea Ornata, or the pinstripe Calathea. So for me, again, this has a difficulty score of a 9. My experience. I know a lot of people in that video were saying that they've got good experiences with this plant and they've grown it quite happily. That was unfortunately not my experience. I will see if I can find, I did, after I edited that original video, I did find one picture of this plant that I somehow managed to take when it was doing really well for a very short period of time, and I will add it there. But after that and before that, it grew like rubbish. So in terms of a score of attractiveness for me for this plant, this gets a 6. So, and there's a reason for that. I don't mind the fact that it's got dark foliage. The pinstripey pinkiness isn't for me, but I know a lot of other people might find it attractive. So for me, this is a 6 out of 10 in terms of attractiveness. Would I have probably given it a 7 if it was a slightly easier Calathea? Maybe. So maybe some of my attractiveness score is getting skewed by how challenging I found this plant. But yeah, I will stick with my score with this one. We're now getting into parts of the list of some of the plants that I might suggest for some people. The Calathea Majestica White Star. So this was a really interesting plant when I first got it. It's unusual in the sense that you do get a lot of that white striping, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to remember what this plant looks like. I will have a picture for you here so you can see it. That really wasn't that easy of a plant. It might have been the way that I was growing it when I was growing it, because I got it and then went on holiday and it stayed in a very hot, humid room for a very long period of time, and I don't think it ever truly recovered. But at the same time, this wasn't a plant that I found came up easily enough for me to find it and retry it again. But based on the experience that I had with this plant, I would still give this a 9 in terms of difficulty, and I know I've just said that these are some of the plants that I might suggest to people, but also I'm giving it an attractiveness score of 8 out of 10. So for me, this is one that, again, I don't want to judge it too much. That's why it's as high or as low, depending on how you look at it, on this list, because it might have just been my specific conditions when I first owned this plant. I still think this is a beautiful plant, and if you want to trouble your way through it, I think this might be a really interesting plant to own. How about the Calathea roseopicta Medallion? So this is a plant that I didn't own for too long because it noped out of my collection relatively quickly. So I'm still giving this a difficulty score of 8 out of 10. for that reason alone, it wasn't the most straightforward, at least in my experience, to grow. And I did get this at a relatively sizable size, if that makes sense. I'll tell you the plants that I got, which were much more diminutive. I do give this a score of 9 out of 10 for attractiveness. Very few plants that we will ever get tend to have such intricate and beautiful, beautiful leaves. And it is a bit of a showstopper. It is one that people will come into your house and just go, that's obviously a fake plant. This is like, no, this is real. Look at it. Look at how pretty it is. But yes, it is one of the more challenging Calatheas, at least in my experience. It does not take away from the fact that I think it looks absolutely stunning. Oh, and the first Maranta on the list, Maranta Lemon Lime. So this was a plant that I got and it was a bit meh, wah, wah, wah. I found it, I got it. It wasn't one that I was actually actively enamored with or looking for specifically. But interestingly, out of a lot of the Marantas that I have owned, this is one that I found the most challenging, which is entertaining because Marantas generally tend to be better in terms of their scoring, in terms of difficulty. So I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. And for the people out there that are just like, but Memo, you like a lot of like lime greeny type plants. Why did you not like this plant? I don't know. It just never really did it for me. So for that reason, I'm giving this a attractiveness score for me of 3 out of 10. It really did not rock my world, so to speak. Again, some of that scoring in terms of attractiveness might have got skewed because I'm only human by the fact that it was a more challenging Maranta, because I went into this, as most people do with Marantas, just go, it's a Maranta, it should be relatively okay. This one I found to be relatively challenging for a Maranta. I did not own this in my collection for a very long period of time because it noped out of existence. Right, and from this point onwards in the list, these are plants that I would happily retry, at least personally, growing again in my collection. So the Stromanthe sanguinea Triostar, or the Triostar. And stunning, stunning plants as well. I gave this a difficulty score of 7 out of 10. And before you all jump in the comments, I'll tell you why. Also, spoiler, this got a 10 out of 10 in terms of attractiveness. Stunning, stunning Calathea. I know not everybody agrees with that, but I still think it's a beautiful Calathea. Oh, Calathea, Stromanthe prayer plant, essentially. But for me, I really struggled with this. I will heavily caveat that, and that's why I'm saying some of these plants I would want to retry again in my collection. I did not know enough at that stage about Calatheas, and I think I kept this a bit too moist. I kind of went with them just like, I need to keep you happy, and I need to keep you happy. I will say that it was still one of the more forgiving plants. I'm thinking back now going, if I gave that crappy care that I gave to that plant to any of the other Calatheas in this list, they probably would have perished a lot sooner, true, but I still found this challenging. It doesn't mean I wouldn't want to retry it, and as soon as I move houses, this is on the list of plants that I want to reintroduce into my collection and see if I can grow it more successfully this time. Okay, and the next one is one that I do have in my care. Please ignore the crispiness of that leaf. We've just had a heat wave in the UK, so it is one that has fried a bit in terms of the heat wave. But this is the, I can never remember the full name, the Calathea roseopicta silver plate. Absolutely stinking, stunning plant. Let me put this down and I'll hopefully put a picture here as well. So for this plant, I gave it a 6, a very respectable 6 out of 10 for difficulty and a 10 out of 10 for attractiveness. I do really think that this is a very beautiful plant. Very few plants will get me this excited because yes, even though it does say silver, it doesn't, when you've got it in your hands, it's more of a very pale green and you get that pinkish purplish blush on it. Absolutely stunning. And the reason why it got such a low, like 6 out of 10 in terms of difficultness, it has been, not to jinx myself, so far one of the easiest Calatheas that I have ever owned. Is it the easiest Calathea? No, but I've also got this, probably unlike what a lot of people have, this is getting an awful lot of light. And you can see maybe there's a tiny bit of burning on this leaf, but for that reason, I thought I'd give it a 6 out of 10 just to keep it a bit more balanced in terms of their difficulty. And then again, part of the same family, the Calathea roseopicta Dottie. This was a plant that I didn't have in my collection for far too long, and I cannot remember why. I do think that this kind of, again, noped itself out of existence. But interestingly, this is the only plant for me that is kind of middle ground for both of my scoring. So a 5 out of 10 in terms of difficulty and a 5 out of 10 for attractiveness. It was a bit like, okay, stunning to look at, but then when you've got it in your space, you're just like, I don't know if I like you, I don't know if I dislike you. You're kind of in the middle, for me. But I don't remember this being as a particularly difficult Calathea to grow. But yeah, this was a... Ooh, and the Calathea makoyana. Stunning plant. Which means that for this, I gave it a really solid, like, attractiveness score of 8 out of 10. And the difficulty for this one, this was one of my easier prayer plants type plants, which I gave this a 4 out of 10 in terms of the score for the difficultiness. So not a particularly difficult plant, again, in my experience. I will say that I started this as a very, very small plant and then grew it larger. Did this grow particularly fast? No. Did it grow painfully slow? Also no. Was this a lot more adaptable, at least in my experience, in terms of a lot of the other allocations? Calatheas? Yes. So that is why I'm giving this a 4 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. But yeah, still think this is a stunning plant. Still will get an 8 out of 10 for me. And then, again, a very much related plant, the Calathea roseopicta crimson, if I'm not mistaken. And this is one of the 2 plants that I am doing now the experiment in terms of trying this out. And this is the one that's in the pure orchid bark, and it's doing relatively well, actually. Got this as a very small plant. It's still a very small plant. This is not a particularly large plant. But so difficulty for this one, so far from what this is showing me and the one that I've got in soil, I'd give this a 4 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. So really not bad at all. And then attractiveness, a very reasonable 5 out of 10. I'm not giving this a super high score yet. It is very unusual with the fact that it's pretty much entirely kind of pinkish, like a deep pink color, and you don't see this very often. But I want to reserve judgment on this plant until it gets a bit larger, so I could maybe then give it a higher score. But from what I'm seeing at the moment, a reasonable 5 out of 10. And this is a plant that I don't think I have ever shown in my channel, because I didn't have it by the time I started my channel. The Calathea Zebrina. Yes. And this, I'm giving it a difficulty score of 4 out of 10. So one of the easier Calatheas, believe it or not. I don't know if this is one that people struggle with. I did get it relatively large specimen of this, but super easy for me to take care of. And interestingly with this one was like, oh, I don't know, but I'll see. But then I got it in my care and I had it after a few days and I'm just like, I'm in love. Look at the foliage. For me, oh, there is something about the stripiness and those dark bands on the leaves. Oh, so for the reason that I find this quite attractive, I gave this a 7 out of 10 in terms of attractiveness for me. So, and this is definitely another one of those plants that as soon as I get a new place, I think I'm going to be retrying again. I really miss growing a Calathea Zebrina, and we've talked about this on another video. Some of these plants that you grow again many years later, it feels like coming home. And it's just like, oh, this is quite nice, actually. I remember the days, not just remember having this plant, but I remember the care that I gave this. It's a very kind of emotional thing. So the Calathea Zebrina for me. And then the other plant I've got here, and this is a Calathea warscewiczii. Anybody from part of the world where those names originate from, I am so sorry. I've entirely butchered your language. But the kind of velvety type of Calathea with the standard kind of purple-backed leaves. And this is one that I was never going to necessarily get. I was very curious about it because the leaves are very petable, and you can see it's dusty and musty and a bit crusty. However, this has been living in possibly some of the worst locations in this conservatory for years now, and I got this as a bit of a rooted propagation from somebody in one of the London plant swaps, and I think that individual has occasionally asked me, is it still in my collection? Looky! is here, and it's still doing okay. Is it growing particularly fast? No, but it's doing okay. And actually, that is part of the reason why this gets a difficulty score of 4 out of 10. It's not been a particularly difficult plant in my experience. And in terms of attractiveness, this was a 5 out of 10. This is still a 5 out of 10. It's not one that I would have gone out of my way to necessarily purchase, but I'm enjoying growing it, basically. And it's not a plant that offends my delicate sensibilities, if that makes sense. So, yeah, the Calathea Velvet, I'm not going to say the name again. And then the Calathea Ornata Beauty Star, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll put a picture here. Another one that gets a difficulty score of 4 out of 10, not a particularly difficult plant to grow. And actually this gets an attractiveness score from me of 7 out of 10. This is one that I think is highly underrated and it's going under the radar for a lot of people. And it is one that when you get it in your care, it truly is quite stunning because you get some color change that happens on those stripiness, you can get some of that pinkiness, that you get that kind of blush, almost sun-stressed look that you were getting on the silver plate that I was showing you before, but in lines. But even when you don't get that, it's still a relatively interesting plant to grow. This is one that I grew from a very small plant and it's now quite large. Part of the reason why I can't show you now, it's difficult to kind of pick up and show. But definitely one that I would possibly recommend for people to try. It's not particularly easy, at least in my experience, to find this very often. I don't think I've ever seen it since I bought it back then to purchase. But now moving into plants that have survived for quite a long time in my collection. Some of them might still be with me, some of them I've kind of gifted to other people, but a lot of these plants are not ones that have necessarily died off, which is a good thing. So the next one is another Maranta, the Maranta Kerchoveana, I think. I'll bring up the picture here. This is not one I still own in my collection because it was okay, but it didn't excite me fully. So I would give this a 6 out of 10 to be fair. But in terms of ease, this was another 4 out of 10. This was a relatively easy prayer type plant to take care of. It just didn't really do it for me that much, but stunning plant nonetheless, and one of the less fussy prayer plants out there. And now we're getting into the top 5. How about a Calathea musaica or the Calathea network? I don't think a lot of people who've grown this plant would be surprised to see it being where it is. This I gave a difficulty score of 3 out of 10. So by far one of the easiest Calatheas I have ever grown. I know that's not always the case for everybody, and I've said this several times in the video, we're all going to have different experiences, but this was a stunning plant. This is one that, again, I want to re-add into my collection when I move house, and the only reason why this is not in my collection is one of the most recent moves. I'm trying to remember, I think it was one of the movers really truly fell in love with this plant, and it was quite sizable at that point, and they moved a lot of my plants for me, the garden ones. They wouldn't touch the house plants, but because they did that and he saw this one and just, I really love that plant, and I'm just like, here you go, and it's fine. I can always replace it because I kind of found it as easy as I did. But attractiveness score for this one, probably not a shocker to anybody because it's such an unusual kind of texture, or not texture, patterning on the leaf. 9 out of 10. This is stunning. Not many other plants that you're ever going to get as a house plant will have that kind of grid format on its leaves. Stunning, stunning, stunning. This one might surprise a few people. The Calathea, I think it's Calathea? Yes, the Calathea Velvet Glory. I'll see if I can find the real name that I bought this. Was it the rufibarba? I might be wrong, I might be right. I'll see if I can kind of put the name down below. Oh. So, few things here, even though I'm getting excited by this. So this, I've given a 3 out of 10 in terms of ease. Probably one of the easiest Calatheas I have ever owned, hands down. It took a lot of abuse from me. I had it and it was easy back when I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So that should tell you something. Attractiveness, I unfairly gave this a 3 out of 10 because I think for a lot of people they'll be like, wah, wah, wah. It's not very exciting for a Calathea. Look at it, it's really, really plain. However, if there was a score that I was going to give for tactile kind of like feel of the leaves, this would have got a 10 out of 10. Oh, this was the ultimate kind of petable leaves. It's not just velvety on the top, it's got this almost like really dense kind of hair underneath the leaves. Oh, just if you are one of those really tactile people and you want to touch the leaves of your plants, and I know that there's issues that could happen there, but this is, if I ever find this again, because I'm finding these less and less frequently, this is definitely getting re-added into my collection. However boring it might look, just so I can kind of pet it on occasion. I'm just like, oh wow. The next one might come as a bit of a shock to some people because it's very similar to another plant that was already on this list. The Stromanthe sanguinea magic star, not the Triostar. And it's interesting because this has got a much easier score of 3 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. And yes, this one, unlike the other one that had a very high attractiveness score, this one I've kind of scored at about a 6 or a 5 out of 10. It's not as attractive as the Triostar, I will say this. This is very much in the beginning of my journey, I bought this 2 years, I think, before I found the Triostar, and when I saw this, I didn't know what the hell I was doing at that point. I wasn't even reading the labels too quickly, but I was kind of looking at it going, oh, it's a Triostar, and it wasn't. I didn't realize there's a different variant of it called the Magic Star. However, substantially easier to grow this plant than the Triostar. So you can kind of see why this has ended up scoring as high as it can, again, mainly from a difficulty point of view. This was a relatively straightforward plant for me. Again, another plant that I've happily gifted to a friend who up until at least a year ago, I was still getting updates on occasion going, yeah, the plants are still surviving. This one was thriving in their care, absolutely ginormous. Coming on to the top 2 now. So the Calathea Freddie, I think there's another scientific name, and I'll see if I can put it down at the bottom there. Might not look like the most exciting plant, and for that reason I've given this a 3 out of 10. It's a bit like, oh, okay, there are more interesting leaves out there, but I've given this an easy score of a 2 out of 10 in terms of like ease of kind of growth for this one. I found this plant to be an absolute breeze. Again, another plant that I no longer have in my collection, but I have gifted out to some people that I think, is this still growing in their collection? I don't know if they've since gifted it to other people as well. This is what I mean. Unfortunately for it, it's not the most exciting of leaves, but definitely one that's a relatively easy plant. And the top plant on this list might not come as a surprise to many people because a lot of people have been growing this for a while for not a lot of hassle. If I'm not mistaken, Kaylee Ellen has still got her one, Gus. The Maranta, Leuconeura, Erythronera, I think. I'll put the name here, basically. The standard, kind of the bog standard Maranta that you can get everywhere. Super, super easy. Gave this a difficulty score of about a 2 out of 10. But in terms of attractiveness, I gave this a 3 or a 4 out of 10. It's not the most interesting type of prayer plant, but super, super easy. Like one of the easiest plants I have ever grown in my collection, hands down. So this did deserve its top place. And I know some people might be surprised and annoyed that it's not a prettier one, but again, I went through this list in terms of difficulty to easiness, and you got the attractiveness score as well. So yeah, what did you think? Did your plant make it somewhere on the list? I am assuming 100% of the time that not everybody's going to agree with my list on this one. If you are so inclined and you want to list the same plants, and if you've grown all the plants, or if you want to say, I grow this plant and I would have put this score and this score, please do so some below. For the people that don't want to spend hours writing comments, if you've had one of your favorite ones that I put on this list and your scoring is different than mine, put down below which one it is, what difficulty you would give it, and the attractiveness that you would score it out of. I'm very, very curious. If you also want to tell people how you're growing that plant, especially if it's growing well for you, please do so down below. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.